you have just one of the most interesting perspectives on leadership. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and how you came to that understanding?
Well, I think it is a rather eclectic and I think interesting perspective. I was a CEO for 30 years. Built a company from scratch to $100 million in revenues. So I've certainly spent my time in the CEO trenches, if you will. Dealing with an opaque future is about accepting uncertainty as a strategic choice rather than trying to overcome it, while at the same time creating and leading a resilient organization that can demonstrate the strategic nimbleness and adaptability of coping with an uncertain future. But I'm also a military historian. I've produced a lot of programs for TV on military history and world affairs and written a few books on the subject as well. So I think I have an interesting perspective that combines that hands-on experience with a much broader historical perspective.
Joseph Micallef, he wrote the book, Understanding World War I and how it relates to today. He also has DVD in the back. Joe, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
The difference between a process and an outcome is the difference between making a prediction or accepting the fact that you can't make an accurate prediction and focusing instead on the procedures for managing uncertainty. You know, I speak in a very broad range of venues. I speak to commercial enterprises, I speak to nonprofits, I deal with government entities, because in the end, they're all sharing the same basic problem, and that is trying to understand a future that is opaque, a future that is becoming increasingly more opaque, and they all struggle with the fact to have to make decisions in the face of uncertainty, in the face of what euphemistically we call knowledge gaps. What I deal with is decision making in an opaque environment. In other words, making decisions in a situation where the future is very unclear. And that's a very timely topic right now. Why do we invariably get the future wrong? Take the hit movie Back to the Future 2. Filmed in 1985, it purported to show life in the United States 30 years hence, in 2015. The most glaring miss of Back to the Future was the internet. Notwithstanding the fact that the popularization of the internet was less than a decade away, the movie makes absolutely no mention of it. When companies hire me to speak, the takeaway really is a function of what they're looking for and what their particular needs are. I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been a speaker, I've hired speakers. When I've hired speakers, what I say to that speaker is, look, these are the issues we're dealing with. I don't want your canned speech that you've given 30 times before. I want you to take your knowledge and your experience and apply it to the specific issues that I'm dealing with. And that's going to vary by industry. And I think the takeaway ultimately is that you're going to give them a different perspective, a different paradigm for how to deal with uncertainty. The future is a scary place. In an increasingly interconnected world with lightning-fast communications, the future happens faster and faster, and oftentimes in wholly unexpected ways. Issues that weren't even on the radar can suddenly erupt with devastating consequences. Managing unknown risks is not about being right. It is about anticipating and managing the consequences of being wrong. It's about accepting the fact that when dealing with an opaque future, most organizations will fail to correctly anticipate what the future holds. Leadership is a very multifaceted phenomena. Leadership isn't a hat that you put on. It's not a degree that after a period of study they hand to you and they say, okay, here you go, now you're a leader. It's not a merit badge that you earn. There are lots of different types of leaders because there's lots of different leadership situations that have to be addressed. And frankly, there's no one speaker that can speak to all of those, just like there's no one doctor that can cure everything that's potentially wrong with you. You cannot encourage strategic nimbleness if decision makers who change their minds are viewed with suspicion by their organizations. Football is a classic example of an environment where a strategy is constantly being adjusted based on what the offensive and defensive coordinators are observing on the field. You know, lots of football games are won in the second half because one team does a better job of adapting to field conditions and to the strategy that the other team is following. And you expect that. No coach would say, this is our strategy and we're going to stick to it no matter what. Organizations often find themselves in a situation where decision-making involves a choice between an optimistic and a pessimistic scenario. I call this the optimist-pessimist trap. The presumption is that one side is right and one side is wrong. Deliberations revolve around determining who is correct and making the right choice. But what if either side has simply identified a plausible, equally probable scenario? Today, the single biggest threat to an enterprise is not competition from like entities, but the risk of being disintermediated from traditional core markets by new competitors who can use social media to create entirely new forms of intermediation. Now, some industries are dealing with a more opaque future than others. In some cases, the future is changing faster for some industries than it is for others. But regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of whether you're government or nonprofit, we all have to deal with the future. And that future is increasingly opaque. And that's a feature of the future that isn't going to change anytime soon.